Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at chapter 46 of book 5 from Caesar's de Bello Gallico. So remember, we're focusing on Ambiorix's revolt. We're in the middle of the Gallic Wars, so about the halfway point in 54 BCE, and it's during the winter time. So we've seen so far in the narrative that Ambiorix has attacked a few Roman camps, right? At this point, he's besieging the camp of Cicero. And we've gone through a few chapters of the siege, what's happening, and they're waiting for help from Caesar. What we saw in the last chapter is messengers had finally reached Caesar, telling him what's going on at Cicero's camp. And now we're going to see Caesar's response as he kind of rallies the troops. You'll see his logistical strategy and his genius in play as he mobilizes the Roman army, or at least part of it, to respond. But before we dive into the whole chapter, what I always tell you in these videos, the first thing you want to do is just make sure that you have the vocab squared away. So there's a couple ways you can do this. You could either pre-read the story, right? Just go through the chapter, pick out any words you don't know, or find a good vocab list online. With this being the AP curriculum, there's so many out there. I'm sure it would be very easy to find one on Quizlet. You could also pick up a commentary. They have good vocab lists. Any way you can, though, get the vocab and practice it, because it's really hard to know what's going on if you don't know what the words mean. The second thing that I'd always recommend is make sure you're reading this aloud. And you hear me say this in all these videos. It's difficult when you're reading for the AP Latin exam. Time is crunched, right? You don't have a ton of time. But if you can read this aloud, maybe find a classmate so you can work on your speaking, your pronunciation. And then when they read it back to you, you can hear the story and work on your listening skills. These are really important. And it might be what unlocks Latin for you. You don't want to treat it, as just a language you're reading in your head without actually saying it out loud. Bring it to life. You might be more of an auditory learner. You never know, but it's always a good idea to just help with that understanding by opening up a couple different avenues for yourself, right? In this video, I'll read it to you, but my pronunciation is nothing fantastic. So work on it on your own, right? And again, it's worth the investment of time. The last thing I'd say, you always hear me say this, when it comes time for translating, the best thing you can do is do the read and reread method, where you start at the beginning of the chapter, you read all the way through, you write down any words or sentences, phrases you don't understand. And when you've made it all the way through the chapter, you go back and try to figure out where you went wrong. If it's vocab, that's really easy. If it's grammar, it's a little bit trickier, but this is where a good commentary will help you. And you keep repeating that process over and over again until you can get from start to finish of the chapter without needing any help. This is really important for the AP test because, again, you're trying to put it into your long-term memory. If you just translate and move on, you're not going to remember it by the time the test comes around. A lot of courses will do the AP Latin curriculum over 2 years, or at least a year and change. It's very difficult to remember everything. There's a lot on that test. This is your best way to make sure you've got it. It's also just really good practice to actually understand Latin if you're struggling. Just use it as a way to make sure that you understand before you move on. Okay? So if you haven't done all that, pause the video, work on that, and come back to it. And what you should do for the rest of the video is just do a double check. Make sure that you're in roughly the same area as my translation. Again, mine's not perfect, but it should give you a guidepost of where you should be, and just feel confident that you're ready to move on. Okay? So the chapter starts like this. You have Caesar, acceptis literis, hora circiter, and then you have xi, right, 11. Die statem nuntium in bellovacos ad crassum quaestora mitit. Cuius hiberna aberrant ab eomilia passuum, and then you have XXV, right? The number for 25, and the line kind of continues from there. So we're starting with Caesar. Remember, he just got messages that Cicero's under attack. So you see it here, Caesar acceptis literis, right? Caesar having received accepted the letter, right? So he's got this message that they're in trouble, right? You have at around the 11th hour, right, of the day. So you have ora circiter xi diei, right? So about the 11th hour of the day, immediately he sends mitit, right? So Caesar's going to respond to all this. He's going to send out nuntium, a messenger. So he sends a messenger, right, among the Bellovaci, right, in Bellovacos, that's a Gallic tribe, and he sends the messenger to Marcus Crassus, right, the quaestor. So this is where he's starting to kind of rally his troops. He gets the message, and he's like, "Whoop, we gotta backtrack and get messages out and kind of rally the army." And it's not just Crassus, but it's Marcus Crassus, cuius hiberna aberrant, right? So whose winter camp, right, the hiberna, was, so aberrant means like it was away, right? So his winter camp was 25 miles. So you have milia passuum xxv, right? So 25 miles abeo from that place. Literally, it's like 25 thousands of steps, remember the Roman mile. So he sends a messenger out to Crassus, and he's saying, we're in trouble, right? So he's sending it, to try to rally the rest of the Roman army. Okay. And just as a side note, before we move on, I can't remember if we mentioned this or not. This Marcus Crassus is not the one you might be thinking of, the famous one for being one of the most wealthy men in the world and part of the first triumvirate with Julius Caesar. This Marcus Licinius Crassus is his son, right? So think of the first triumvirate Crassus. This is his oldest son or eldest son, who was a quaestor in the Gallic Wars. I think he becomes a pro-quaestor later on. But he's one of Caesar's generals, basically, right? One of his high-ranking officers. So again, worth looking into. This is actually his son. All right. So now we continue the rest of the line. You have Iubet media nocte legionem proficisci celeriterque ad se venire, exit cum nuntio Crassus. Right. So he orders. So Caesar orders. So he says, "Hey, we're sending out messengers, right, to Crassus, whose camp was 25 miles away." And he orders, right, in the middle of the night for the legion to depart. So he orders the legion to depart media nocte, in the middle of the night. So remember, he was talking about it being the 11th hour. So that's important because when you think of 11th hour, we've talked about timing before in some of my videos. It's not 11 in the morning or 11 o'clock at night. It's the 11th hour of the day. So you assume whenever the sun comes up, call it 6 o'clock, give or take, it's the 11th hour after that. So give or take, we're talking about maybe 5 in the afternoon, somewhere along there, depending on kind of when the sun comes up, right? So when he's telling him to leave in the middle of the night, it's a quick turnaround. It's, hey, right now, right? Don't wait till tomorrow. In the middle of the night, we want you to get out of here. Okay. So he orders in the middle of the night, he orders the legion to depart and quickly to come to him, right? Ad se venire. The se there is reflexive. It's referring to Caesar. So he tells him, hey, get your legion, get all your stuff and get back here because I need you. Then you have exit cum nuntio Crassus, which means Crassus leaves with the messenger, right? So Crassus departs, and again, Caesar's kind of organizing his forces here. Then you go to the next line. You have alterum ad Gaium Fabium legatum mitit, ut in attribatium fines legionem aduca, quas sibi iter faciendum scieba. So again, mitit, Caesar sends, right? He sends another to the legate Gaius Fabius, right? So again, he's sending out messengers to different, to several of his commanders. Is what I mean. So one goes to Crassus, another one goes to Gaius Fabius. So again, this is one of Caesar's high-ranking commanders, right? And it says he sends them out so that, and you have in attribatium fines, which just means like into the lands or the borders of the Atrebates, right? Which is another Gallic tribe, aducat legionem, so that he might lead his legion into the lands of the Atrebates, right? So again, he's rallying the troops saying, hey, we need you here, we need you to go there. He's organizing everything, right? And it says that he might lead them into the lands of the Atrebates where, right, you have the qua, where he knew, sciebat, right? So again, it's talking about Caesar. So it says where he knew that that a journey, you might say, that a journey was to be made, faciendum esse, sibi, by him, right? So in other words, he's saying he knows he has to go here, and I'll show you on the map what he's talking about in a second. But when you put this all together, what you're looking at here, the sibi iter faciendum, really essay is attached there. It's an indirect statement, right, with the idea of scieba, right? He knew something. But you have this passive periphrastic going on, which is the gerundive faciendum going with a form of sum, right? So essay is kind of implied. And again, it's expressing this need or obligation. You have that dative going there. So the easiest way to put it, literally, you might say he knew that a journey had to be made by him, is kind of where you see that in commentaries. Literally, it says something like a journey was going to be made by him. But when you put it together, it's saying that Caesar sent Gaius Fabius, right, so that he might bring his legion into the land of the Atrebates, which is where Caesar knows he needs to go. And I'll show you again in a second. But it's saying Caesar knows that he has to make a journey into that land. So he's sending Gaius Fabius there first, right? So again, that last line is where he knew that a journey was going to be made by him, or again, a journey had to be made by him, however you want to do it, to get the idea that, it's important. It's a necessity that Caesar needs to go through this land. So what does this all mean? Well, let's come back to the map we've been using at the start of these videos, right, showing some of the different forts. if you look at where everyone is, right? So Caesar is around that area of Broga, right? So Samaro Briva, there we go, which is circled. It's the circle to like the left here. I've also circled the land of the Bellovaci, right, which is where we said Crassus was, and I've circled the Atrebates, right? So you can see the Atrebates are right next to the Nervii, which is the fort where Cicero is. So if you think about the map and where everyone is, and this is why it's kind of helpful to see it on the map, what Caesar's doing is he's sending a force into the land of the Atrebates because he has to go that way because it's in between him and Cicero. So he's just sending a force to make sure he's not going to get attacked. Now, why would he think that? Because there's an uprising happening. He doesn't know whose side everyone is on. He wants to make sure the Atrebates are good and that no one's going to ambush him. So he's kind of leading an advance force, right? Along the path of where he has to go. So that's how you put all these things kind of into their place. Where's Caesar? Where's Crassus? Where is Fabius going? And where is Caesar ultimately trying to go? This will help you kind of visualize it when you put it on the map. Okay? Then it continues, and you have scribet labieno, si re publicae commodo facere posset, cum legione ad fines nerviorum veniat. Okay? So he writes to Labienus, right? So Labieno, there's just the dative. So he writes to Labienus, right, which is his cavalry commander. And he writes that if he is able to facere, to act, is kind of, I think, the easiest way to understand it, to do something, right? But to act. And then you have re publicae commodo, which is that double dative, right? The dative of interest and the dative of purpose. So the best way to do this would be like for the interest of the republic is kind of an easy way to put it together. So he's saying if he's able to act, in the interest of the republic, that he should come veniat, right? So if he's able, right? And again, that's kind of an interesting phrase. If he's able to act in the interest of the republic, it means like, hey, if you're able to do it, let's just do it. So he writes him and says, hey, if you're able to get there, he should come cum legione, with his legion, ad fines nerviorum, to the lands of the Nervii, which again is the group where Cicero is and which has been acting up with Ambiorix. So again, he reaches out to Labienus, one of his most trusted commanders. He says, if you're able to do it, right, if you're able to act in the interest of the republic, you should come now. And notice how he says in the interest of the republic, which is an interesting phrase. It's not in the interest of Caesar. And that's an interesting kind of turn of phrase, because remember, it's kind of questionable what Caesar's doing in Gaul. But he doesn't say in my interest, which is really what it is. He says in the interest of the republic, right? Which is just kind of an interesting turn of phrase. And you'll see later on when you look at the Civil War, it's kind of interesting. He uses that phrasing with Labienus, but I'll let you explore that on your own. Either way, he's telling him, get over, if you're able to, get over to the land of the Nervii with your legion, because I need help, right? Then we get the last line. It's kind of a shorter chapter. So you have reliquam partem exercitus, quod Paulo aberat longius non putat expectanda. Equites cerciter quadrigentos ex proximis hibernis colligit rather. So you have this phrase, the reliquam partem executus, means the remaining part of the army. So he doesn't have his whole army here, which is interesting. There's a bunch that's missing. He only has a couple legions, right? But it says the remaining part of the army, because it was farther away, longius, right? The comparative, Paulo, by a little, right? So again, we've seen this before. Paulo is that ablative of degree of difference. It literally means a little. I think by a little is probably the easiest way to do it, right? So because it was a little further away, he does not believe, non putat, he doesn't think, or he doesn't believe that the rest of the army, expectandum, right? So here what you really have is expectandum is going with reliquam partem, right? The feminine noun. It's all kind of put together here. So expectandum is really expectandum esse. Again, it's that passive periphrastic, which we just saw, which is when you use a gerundive, expectandum with esse. And again, it's expressing that obligation or necessity is usually what we say. It's also in an indirect statement governed by putat, because he's thinking something here. So the way you probably want to do expectandum esse is it must be waited for, or more literally is something like it's going to be waited for. So if you kind of use must, you'd be saying he doesn't think or doesn't believe that, indirect statement, the remaining part of the army, or the rest of the army, which was a little farther away, must be waited for, right? Or was going to be waited for. So in other words, he's saying, I'm not waiting for the rest of the army. I've got what I need and all I can get in a short time. It's time to go. Okay. Again, a little bit tricky to unpack that. Then you have equites cerciter quadrigentos. So you have around 100, sorry, not 100, around 400 cavalry, the equites, so 400 horses, right? Colligit, he collects. Ex proximis hibernis, from nearby winter quarters. And again, this cavalry is probably allied Gallic cavalry. That's usually who he's rolling out. Not so much Roman cavalry, but he's getting it from nearby, right? And nearby is kind of the key term, because he's not calling his army from everywhere. It's just kind of, what can I get quickly as fast as possible? He's able to get a couple legions, maybe an extra one, if he can get Labienus to show up, and about 400 cavalry. And this is all he has, right? So he collects them. He's not going to wait for the rest of the army, and he's going to march to try to save Cicero, because time is of the essence. Again, he knows that this is a time-sensitive situation. Okay. So that's all there is for this chapter, right? It's a pretty short one, but there's still some important things to think about. And it's all kind of the same point, but you see it in different ways. The thing that's really on display here to me is how fast Caesar can move. And this is one of his trademarks, his logistical skill and how fast he can move, right? His speed. So when you're moving an army, it's not easy to just grab a bunch of men. They need supplies. You need people, like blacksmiths. There's a whole bunch of people who go with the army and make sure everything works properly. So it's not as easy, especially if they're in winter quarters, which is where you go to kind of literally spend the winter. You're not really prepared to fight. It's incredibly impressive to just turn around and say, hey, it's time to go. We need you. So this logistical skill is really on display. So you want to notice how quickly he assesses the situation. He realizes we have a major problem here, right? Cicero's under attack. We got Ambiorix going all over the place. Can't have it. And he organizes all of his forces, or at least a chunk of his forces, to get out of the winter quarters and to go fight Ambiorix, right? And you see that in the very first line of this chapter, where he uses the word statin immediately. So in that first sentence, right, it says, Caesar having accepted the letters, he immediately sends out a messenger. That's showing how fast he moves, right? So he acts right away. As soon as he knows there's a problem, boom, we're not going to hesitate. And I think it stands in pretty stark contrast to what we saw with Sabinus and Cotta in the very beginning of this book. Right? I know it feels like a long time ago, but they're all about delaying and hesitating, and everyone gets killed. Caesar is showing himself to be much more decisive than that. And I think that's the point, right? He doesn't hesitate. He just knows what to do. It's kind of propping himself up as a good general, which he was. The other thing that you notice is in that first line, the medianotte, which I pointed out to you. Again, there's no delay. It's like, don't take your time. We can't even wait until tomorrow in the middle of the night, which is a dangerous thing to do, right? Moving an army in the middle of the night. He's like, we got to go, right? Time is of the essence. So you can see there's no delay here. The last thing that I already pointed out is he doesn't have his whole army with him, which he points out, right, to the reader. He doesn't wait for all his army. He doesn't have all his cavalry. And there's a couple ways you can interpret this. One is the obvious one, that time is of the essence, right? So he needs to move quickly, and he can't wait because Cicero is not going to make it much longer. And that probably is the right answer of what he's trying to tell you here. But I think another way to interpret this is how confident Caesar is, right? So you have to remember, he's writing this after he already has defeated Ambiorix. So what he writes is what he wants you to know about this. Was he actually thinking that? Maybe. We don't really know. But notice how he doesn't, take all of his army or his cavalry. It also gives this hint of confidence, right? I don't need my whole army to destroy you. Right. And you'll see if you keep reading kind of what happens in the fight he has with Ambiorix. We'll get to a little bit, but that's kind of confident, maybe overconfident, to be like, I don't need my whole army to put this down. I only need what I have. It worked out for him, obviously, but he's also playing that up and making you see it as the reader. He's telling you that on purpose, right? For whatever reason, he's making a point of, I didn't take my whole army, and look how fast I was able to do this. It really speaks to him as a general, which again is the point. So hopefully this all made sense. This chapter has a couple trickier lines for a shorter chapter. But if there's anything you have questions on, put in the comments below. If I went too fast or need to explain something more, feel free to put it there. I'll help you out. But otherwise, again, what you're looking to be able to do is go from start to finish in this chapter and get most, if not all of it, and understand it really well, be able to explain it, translate it. If you can do that, that's how you know you're ready to move on. Good luck.